Morning, everyone. I've been thinking a lot about burnout recently, and this is something that, on a grander scale, I've experienced with some close family members. I've watched them go through it and supported them through it. You know, the kind of burnout that ends up being 6 months off school or work, that level of burnout. And I've met people who have been absent from work for 2 years. I met someone last week who had experienced burnout and had to take 2 years off work and was slowly getting back into the idea of work by doing volunteer work. And I give you the kind of worse end of the scale so that you can truly understand the severity of it. It's a word that gets bandied about quite a lot. And in this context, I'm thinking, people burnout that occurs when people are on the autism spectrum or who have an ADHD profile. And this kind of burnout is different in the sense that particularly undiagnosed people have been masking their whole lives. And with the added pressure that they, on top of the pressure that they may be feeling in whatever situation they're in, there's also the added pressure of having to mask all day, every day, of having to live in a world that has neurotypical expectations and doesn't recognize that a neurodivergent profile may have much greater fluctuations in terms of energy and capacity. And when we're at the top of our game, we are at the top of the game. But then there are days that balance this out where we really need to take days off. We need time out. We need all demands to fall away. And, it may be that our capacity and ability evens out over time or exceeds neurotypical abilities over time. But there's a spikiness of the profile that isn't fully accepted in workplaces and many educational establishments. And so there's this more significant burnout where someone has been struggling and coping for a very, very long time and has finally hit this position of, I cannot cope anymore. My body is broken. I feel broken. I need to shut down. And that is what it is. It is a shutdown. Signs of burnout can include things like not having the energy or ability to shower, to engage in personal hygiene, not having the energy to eat or even contemplate food. It's very basic body functions that kind of shut down, but also withdrawal from social activities, inability to go to work or go to school. The consequences are really serious. And in an ideal world, we would avoid this, but unfortunately we're not yet in an ideal world. So what we're faced with is how to support people who are going through burnout. Now, these kind of burnout cycles, because it is a cycle, these burnout cycles can happen on a much more frequent basis, so a weekly basis or a monthly basis or a daily basis even, where as individuals we have an enormous amount of energy. And this isn't true for everyone, but it is true for a lot of people. We have an enormous amount of energy and suddenly we find we're able to get all of those telephone calls done, all of the letters written, all of the little jobs that have been on our to-do list for far too long. We managed to get them done. And I've experienced this myself. I suddenly feel like I'm on fire, like I'm Superwoman, and I get so much done. And this used to happen a lot more before I had children, before the level of demands on me were greater. And people would say, God, you've got so much energy. Where do you get your energy from? And I'd be like, I don't know. And I didn't at the time, because what I hadn't noticed at the time is that I would then crash. And I would have a few days where I just wasn't capable of anything. And I was oblivious to these cycles I went through. I was oblivious to the energy levels of my monthly cycle. And I remember reading this book called Red Moon. And it talked about the cycles that we go through in life. So everyone has this annual cycle. Life cycle, but we also have this annual cycle of the different seasons. And winter is often a season of retreat. And then in spring we'll come out and we'll have renewed energy and we'll get all this stuff done. But this same cycle happens on a kind of a mini burnout level as well, where we have all this energy and then we have to go into retreat and we crash. And having a shower just feels like too much. And making a fancy meal feels like too much. It's going to be fried eggs on toast or maybe even just a bowl of cereal. And when someone is in this period of retreat, it is not appropriate, and this I can't stress too highly, it is not appropriate to expect that person to be able to fulfill their regular demands. Now, this can be difficult, for example, with children who are going through school. At the younger age, you can kind of miss 6 months and it doesn't matter. Even in your teens, you can miss a year. I missed a year of school through going to high school in Croatia when I was 13. And whilst I went to school there, I didn't really understand what I was doing because I didn't speak the language for the first half of the year. And I came back to the UK and hadn't really missed out on much. It didn't impact me at all negatively in terms of my final exams. And so it is possible to miss, and I know this probably doesn't go down very well with the education system, but it is possible to miss significant chunks of your education and not suffer massively as a result of it. But obviously if you're going through exams or there are more significant milestones that need to be met, or in the traditional sense need to be met, this can put a lot more pressure on parents and their children. And, you know, I was brought up in a family where education was everything. We just knew that we were expected to go to university. We knew we were expected to follow the traditional educational route. There was no option to deviate from that. And when I moved to Sweden, and the education system is a much more gentle introduction at the beginning in the early years of schooling. You know, I was sitting there thinking, how do they learn anything? Like, they're doing nothing. Like, they're so far behind the British kids. But clearly, everything balances out okay in the end. And that in itself made me reevaluate my approach to education and work. It made me realise how deeply ingrained I have within me this idea that we need to be educated in a certain way. And through having watched one of my kids go through burnout, I've had to challenge those assumptions and realise that there are many ways to succeed in life. Different countries do things different ways. You have all sorts of famous people who are now billionaires who failed at school. And are now highly successful. And I really think it is worth reminding ourselves that there are different ways to be successful rather than the traditional one. There are different ways to be successful when you think about what your criteria for success is. So if you're brought up thinking educational achievement is the most important criterion for success as a child, you're going to be limiting yourself quite significantly. Because for some people, it's going to be sporting achievements. For some people, it's not going to work for them. They're not going to find themselves until they're in their 20s or 30s, when they find their right paths and they find out what success really means to them. And I've come to the conclusion that for me, a successful career is one that I enjoy, that has flexibility to allow me to attend to the rest of my life, which, you know, I love my work, but my personal life is more important to me than my work. Actually, let me rephrase that. It's not that it's more important to me, it's important to me in a different way. So my work is important to me in terms of having personal achievement, feeling like I'm achieving my potential. My personal life is important to me because it's my life. It's where my heart resides. So just to kind of finish off these thoughts around burnout, I think sometimes it can be really important to really think about what success means for you at any given stage in your life. Is attending an important meeting really the most important thing to you? Is achieving certain grades really the most important thing to you? Is it more important to be happy? Is it more important to have friends, to have a social life? And I remember my first year at uni, I had this fantastic lecturer. He was my personal tutor for the first year, and he was called Professor Jim Reason, very big in the field of high hazard human error, the field of human error. And he was a fantastic tutor, and he said, your first year is to find yourself. I just expect you to get 40% and pass. I want you to have a well-balanced first year. The second and the third years are for hard study and getting your qualifications. The first year is not. So just make sure you pass and I'll be happy. And that was the best advice I could ever have had in terms of, you know, my academic achievements, because it allowed me to live a balanced life. And I carried that through to my work. So my first job was recruitment, and I found it quite stressful. And then I went to work for the civil service for four years or so. And the majority of those first years at work were developing policy on work-related stress for the health and safety executive. And it really taught me about work-life balance. And I had already studied organisational psychology at university, but it added to this sense that we need balance in our lives. Anything that's out of kilter is not going to make us happy. So if you or someone you love is going through burnout, it's really important to listen to them and to lift the demands on them. So, for example, if your child is trying to study for exams or is trying to make more friends, they have an objective that they need to achieve, lift the other demands off them. And when I say demands, I don't mean things like other activities in their lives that they enjoy. I mean things like showers, tidying their room, doing household chores. They can go for a while and you can revisit them in a few months when they have more energy. Notice where the biggest stress points are for your child. So if they are most stressed first thing in the morning, lift the demands in the morning. Hand them their clothes one by one rather than just saying get dressed. Make their breakfast for them rather than expecting them to make their own breakfast. Think about where you can lift the demands off them to leave them free to do the things that matter. And if your child can't go to school, accept that that is what needs to happen at this stage in their lives and that they will bounce back at some point in their own time. I think the other thing that we forget is that when people are in burnout, there is still a level of awareness of what our own needs are for many of us. And it's really important to listen to someone when they say, I can't do that. Encouragement. If you encourage someone to do something when they're in burnout, you could be risking pushing them more deeply into burnout. So you need to be very, very careful and be very, very sure that they really are capable of it. And, as a parent, I would say err on the side of caution. If in doubt, don't do it. If in doubt, cut them some slack. If in doubt, give them a break. It's a year since one of our children hit burnout. And, having come out the other side, I feel like I have grown in strength and confidence in my ability to deal with these things and in my knowledge of my own child. And I think, as always, with any of these situations, the most important thing is that your child or your partner or whoever it is that's going through burnout feels seen and believed and heard by you and is supported by you in the ways that they need to be supported. I really hope this has helped. It's a subject that's been really close to my heart for a year now. So if you have any more questions or you have any thoughts around this, please do share. I'd be very, very interested. And hang in there if you're in the thick of it, either yourself or someone you love. Just hang in there and it will get better. Sending you all strength and support. Bye-bye.